Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember, good news? We heard some this week as the city began loosening COVID restrictions. The state is expected to follow as numbers improve. This in a week when the city council complained that the number of rolling power outages during last week's freeze was way too high. We'll look at these stories plus the prospects for economic recovery in the hospitality industry, the latest in the congressional elections, and there's a new Gulf Coast train a-comin'. We'll also hear about a special investigation that examined regulation of building inspectors. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Katie Moore, anchor and investigative reporter for WWL-TV Channel 4, Tony McAuley, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Tyler Bridges, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Let's go on over to E first for the latest on COVID restrictions, maybe easing a little bit, COVID numbers going down a little bit, which is good news.
City Hall, it was a bit of the opposite this week when they announced that over the last 30 there have been sustained measurements of improvements. There's been a decrease in case counts, decrease in transmission rates, and a decrease in positivity rates. And that's followed by a whole bunch of numbers, but which all show that things are getting better as of now. And again, it was over a sustained period, over a 30-day period. And so there's a little bit of optimism to the extent that they were willing to announce that beginning today that they've loosened up on some things. For example, for the longest, we've been limited to public gatherings of 50 people or 60 people, and now it's 75 people. And the attendance at indoor stadium events is now like 15%, which in the case of the Dome would be something like 11,000 people. And in the case of the Smoothie King Arena would be something like 7,000 people. So more people can start going to games and more activity. So we're not there yet, but at least there's some encouragement. At the same day, Governor John Bel Edwards had a press conference and said that he was seeing good indications, but not all the numbers are in. He wanted to have time to analyze them, but he hinted strongly that there'd be a reduction at the state level too, and we think we'll probably hear him by Wednesday. So by this time next week, we may be free people compared to what we used to be. So.
Not as free as perhaps most people would like to be.
Yeah,
and also, with this, the officials are also emphasizing, look, but don't get too complacent with everything. We still have to have the precautions in place, and they're still concerned about the variants. So the variants that are coming, those virus variants, may cause a spike, an upsurge down the line. Hoping it won't be the case, but that could happen.
And then at the same time, we have this Johnson & Johnson vaccination that's supposed to be coming in too, and that's one shot, and so that can hasten the project. I gotta tell you, I was at a clinic today, and that was giving the shots, not to get a shot, I just happened to be there, and the waiting room for people waiting to get shots was almost empty. It was like the security guard was almost looking for people to give shots to. And so if you have this image of long tormented lines, it's not there. And if you look for the opportunity, it is there.
It is there. I mean, you just have to figure out how to make the appointments, which people are doing. And also, it seems like on the horizon will be some mass inoculation events with these new vaccines coming in. The state seemed to have fallen maybe a little bit behind because it was doing pretty good, but the cold weather interrupted shipment of doses. So they're looking to more doses coming in and really stepping that up.
And in a few weeks, March begins next week, and March for most of us is when this all started. It's when we started hearing. And so I think there's going to be a lot of analysis in the next few weeks of how it started, what we did right, what we did wrong. And but this would be a good time for things to start getting better.
All righty, E. Thanks a lot. Tony, going to move on over to you. And this whole COVID thing has really impacted a major industry here, the hospitality industry. We were hoping for maybe a little bit of help. Hotels were over Mardi Gras, but that didn't happen. So what are they saying?
Yeah, no, it certainly didn't happen. As you know, the restrictions were put on a little bit tighter just beforehand, and they hoped for a little bit of a boost, but in fact it ended up being more of the same bad news, with occupancy rates at below break even in the sort of high 20s across the board. A couple of hotels have been doing a little bit better, but overall it was 77% down on the Mardi Gras week last year in terms of the indicator that the hotels look at. I think everybody pretty much has the same story in terms of what the year might unfold like, which is to say that the major events, the major drivers of tourism, like the cruise ships, the Carnival, the one which accounts for 80% of the traffic in this city, already has one ship not coming back until at least November because it's in dry dock, and they just announced the other one won't start until at least June, and they've been rolling that forward every month since the pandemic began. If you look at the convention center, they only have tentative bookings really for the third quarter. They also don't expect anything to really get going until into 22. And the Superdome, Smoothie King, similarly, they were talking yesterday to their board, and they were saying that it looks really good if you look out to the end of the third quarter, into the fourth quarter, into the beginning of next year for big acts coming and some of these other like monster truck events and stuff like that. But nothing much at all through the summer and into the early part of the fall.
And we heard this week that Essence is going to do virtual, maybe a little bit. What do they plan to do this summer? Some events here in the city?
Nothing really significant. This came up also with the Smoothie King folks, the Superdome folks yesterday. That's essentially a virtual event. But they are going to do a few small events, which they're only advertising, in local venues, which they're only advertising to people in the city here, not outside the city. So it's essentially a virtual event, but they obviously want to keep things a bit lively while they have to get through this summer.
Hey, Tony, wouldn't October be the target month with the Jazz Fest and French Quarter Fest, if they both come back as live events? And then, of course, football season starts again. So if we start seeing, full occupancy in football stadiums, I mean, wouldn't that be a time to look for the possibility of things getting better?
Yeah, Jazz Fest is on the books. French Quarter Fest is on the books.
And not as virtual, as real events.
As real events. And just prior to them, and I was checking with the city tourism authorities what they think about this. Just prior to that, I was wondering if Satchmo Fest might also, if it might get in, given that it's also still on the books as a real event at the end of July, early August, but they think that has a big question mark over it. Everything has a big question, as you guys were alluding to, everything has a question mark over it because this pandemic has proved so unpredictable. I mean, everyone's hopeful now that we turn the corner sometime in the summer, later summer. But I think everybody at this point is, the abundance of caution that everyone refers to really has no people planning anything until you get into the autumn.
St. Patrick's Day.
That's off in Orleans Parish. Not sure about Jefferson, but yeah, so that's an April event. That's off. I guess that was predictable.
But something like the Jazz Fest, they can't wait till October to start planning. I mean, they need to be booking people now.
Yeah. So what happens on the virus numbers and the vaccination numbers between now and when they really have to make a commitment is going to determine whether the event goes ahead and how successful it is. The guys at the Superdome Commission, though, they did say, and they also mentioned that this was a nationwide trend, that a lot of people who had booked events that are rescheduled but don't have firm rescheduled dates have held onto their tickets. It's a very, very high percentage, both for them and nationwide. So I think people might be willing to take a chance on their events, given that there's so much pent-up demand. People are so keen to get back to doing things like Jazz Fest and sporting events,
All righty, Tony. Well, we'll see how it all moves along. Thanks a lot. Katie, over to you. You and your colleague, David Hammer, have been doing some research into building inspectors in Orleans Parish, but it also goes beyond just Orleans Parish and how it all works. There's something called a third-party inspector that you guys discovered a lot of information about, too.
Yeah, we've been working on this story for a few months now. In fact, David's been looking at city inspectors since the Hard Rock Hotel collapse that happened more than a year ago. So it's something that's been on our radar, and we decided to start digging into these third-party inspectors because we discovered that Kenner's top building officials actually working as one, and that there were concerns about the inspections that he was submitting to the city of New Orleans, which resulted in him being banned from doing those inspections in the city because they were questioning whether or not he was submitting duplicate photos for different properties that he was supposed to be inspecting, obviously raising questions about whether or not he was actually on site. And these are the inspections that happen whenever you're going to build a house or do major construction on your house. And a lot of times the homeowners don't even realize who is coming in to inspect or when they're coming in to inspect, because the contractor typically handles all of it. So that's why we decided to call this series Hidden Dangers, because not only are people unaware of it, but they are things that can be hidden when the walls are closed up after construction is done. So we decided to look at those third-party inspectors because there were some serious questions about those.
So if there is a failed inspection done by a third-party inspector, who does that inspector report that to?
Well, apparently in the city of New Orleans, they are not reporting that to the city. They are, at least the largest third-party inspection company is treating those failed inspection visits more as a consultation because of a fine that the city levies against failed inspections. Whether that goes to the contractor or the third-party inspector, it's unclear. But we discovered that there were 0 failed inspections over a 15-month period submitted to the city of New Orleans using city building inspection data. And I've been looking at that for quite some time. But what we're hearing from the main third-party inspector is that he is treating these as consultations, not submitting that information to the city until he goes back to these job sites and brings them up to code with the contractor. So the contractor's working with the inspector to figure out what they need to do to bring it up to code so that they can submit a past inspection to the city. But, obviously that raises some questions about the paper trail, about whether or not they need to be submitting those failed inspections so that as Jane Q. Public, you can look those up and say, hey, at this property, 5 years ago, there was a failed inspection before the walls were closed. And, this is what happened and led up to, my current home or office or whatever kind of building you own.
What exists for terms of licensing or certification of inspectors and then oversight?
Yeah, that's another huge concern that David and I have been really digging into, because these third-party inspectors really have few consequences if they're operating poorly. The state and the state fire marshal's office does have some regulatory authority, meaning they can revoke a registration for these third-party inspectors, but they're not certified in the state of Louisiana. They're not licensed in the state of Louisiana. They simply have to register with the state that they are certified by an outside agency, which is one layer of protection, but the state fire marshal, some top legislative leaders, and even experts in the field are saying this needs more regulation. Lawmakers really need to get at this and say, we need to have some consequences for bad actors. A lot of these third-party inspectors do a great job. They're companies that really supplement the depleted ranks of inspectors at municipalities around the state. But the concern is that there are those bad actors out there, and there are very few consequences that the state fire marshal or anyone else for that matter can levy.
The city inspectors, how many are there? I mean, they were short-staffed. Are they still short-staffed?
Yeah, that number has been dropping drastically in recent years after the Hard Rock, whenever they lost a lot of their inspectors, when David and the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate revealed that they weren't showing up to the job sites in some cases. The city lost a significant number, and they were down to 4 in March of 2020. And I do not believe that number has improved at all since then. So just 4 inspectors to do these tens of thousands of inspections in the city throughout the year.
An issue that came up, after Hard Rock was, were there inspectors really there when they said they were there? And so there were GPS locator devices put into the city inspector cars, right?
Right.
But that's not the case with the third-party inspectors.
Right. The third-party inspectors work for private companies. They are not regulated by city GPS. They don't answer to anybody but the person who owns that third-party company. And then the third-party company submits those inspections to the city. And And the other thing involved in this whole situation is that the municipalities cannot refuse to take third-party inspections. The way the law is written right now, the third-party inspectors have the right to do them all over the state of Louisiana. So there's no real refusing to allow people to submit those third-party inspections. Now, they can put some small regulations in place so that they can try and safeguard against bad actors operating in their parishes and towns, but those regulations are few and far between.
Oh, you guys are going to continue to work on this, I guess, because this is really a very multi-layered, complex issue.
It is a complex issue, and it's one that's really important, and it's one that, again, goes undetected because a lot of people don't even know how the process works, and they're not sure when it's even happening in their own backyard. So it's certainly something that David and I will keep pressing.
And it's an issue of safety, but also of investment. People put a lot of monies into their houses and renovations and such.
Absolutely. We're talking millions of dollars that are spent every year on work on people's homes and offices and buildings. So it is a significant issue.
Okay, Katie, thanks a lot. All right, Tyler, over to you because we are facing some congressional races. How are those looking?
Yeah, the primary is on March 20th for the 2nd Congressional District, which is mostly New Orleans and the West Bank of Jefferson, but also extends up to the river parishes into North Baton Rouge. There are, I think, two main favorites, both state senators from New Orleans who've been elected officials for a long time, Karen Carter Peterson and Troy Carter. I'm actually doing some writing on a guy who's from Baton Rouge, who I think is worth taking a look at, named Gary Chambers. And then there's another 12 people in the race as well. In total, a race, 15 candidates in the field.
Okay, so you've done a couple of pieces just within this past week, taking a look at Karen Carter Peterson and the role that she held as the chair of the Louisiana Democratic Party. Is that right?
One piece was indeed looked at her tenure as chair of the party. She held that position from 2012 to 2020. And I think what invited me or caused me to write the piece is that she was making claims that she played an important role in electing John Bel Edwards as governor in 2015. And thanks to that, Louisiana got its dramatic Medicaid expansion. Now, 450,000 people now have Medicaid thanks to the governor being in office. But what she didn't say, and it's a story that I originally broke, was that actually if it had been up to her, John Bel Edwards would have abandoned the governor's race in 2015, so he never would have become governor. And so then I also, in the article that I wrote the other day for the newspaper, looked at her tenure as what's happened to the party during her 8 years in office.
And then another piece that you followed up on was something that had happened. This was last year. In her role as a state senator, she objected to the appointment of some nominees made by the governor for different positions.
That's right. Every year, the state senate meets in a secret session to confirm nominees by the governor. It's normally very kind of straightforward. Maybe a senator will object to a nominee to someone who lives in their district. If the nominee lives in the senator's district. If they do, the common practice is to give a heads up to the governor so that an appointee can be withdrawn so no one can be embarrassed. But Senator Peterson missed the entire regular session, showed up only on the last day, which was the day of the confirmation, and without anybody knowing, the governor, including the governor, she killed the nomination of Ronnie Jones, the very well-respected former Louisiana State Police official, to continue as the chairman of the Louisiana Gaming Control Board. And also State Representative Walt Leger, a colleague of hers for years, didn't get a heads up that she was going to kill his nomination by the governor to chair the convention center. And then 4 other people got caught up in this and all. So 6 people were, as former state senator J.P. Morrell said, it was a red wedding. All 6 people showed up and didn't make it out.
Well, that has made a number of people unhappy, but the Senator Carter Peterson, she wrote a letter to the editor, right, explaining her position on this?
Yeah, she had not wanted to go public as to why she had killed the 6 nominations, and then she did write a letter to the editor of my newspaper saying that in particular with Ronnie Jones, again, who was going to continue as chair of the Louisiana Gaming Control Board until her action that he had been too cozy with regulated officials, the regulated industry, and also had been in the job for too long. He'd been there for 7 years. So I wrote a follow-up story where Ronnie Jones took deep issue with her comments, and again, he was very well respected. I didn't even get a chance to quote somebody who was a professor who said that he was recognized as among the best. And again, Walt Leger, who lost his job as Convention Center Board Chairman, also had to step down because of her actions in that secret Senate session.
Okay, well, this race for that congressional seat goes on, and what, March 20th is election day for
March
it?
20th is the primary.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot. Let's go back on over to Tony right now. And Orleans Parish City Council not too happy with Entergy for those rolling blackouts during the freeze.
No, they were livid, visibly livid. I think, it was quite surprising to everyone who watched that Entergy New Orleans officials, and other officials had turned up to that meeting with essentially no answers as to why so many people got their power turned off, even though it was a relatively short period of time, especially compared to Texas, which everybody's been talking about. It was still hours, and Cindy Wynn, councilwoman for District E, which covers New Orleans East, talked about a couple of hundred elderly people in a assisted care facility who had freezing cold weather to deal with for hours, or at least an hour and 20 minutes on Mardi Gras. Helena Moreno, I think she might have actually been in Cochon, because she said they had to kick everybody out of the restaurant on Mardi Gras evening when they were, back to what we were talking about earlier, they were having, one of their rare busy evenings. So, and then it was followed the following day by an embarrassingly large profit by Entergy for last year. It was a record profit, in fact, of $1.4 billion. So there's an investigation now, and we'll see where that leads.
Well, supposedly these rolling blackouts, there were more of them than were called for.
Yeah, way disproportionately. It's New Orleans, Entergy New Orleans accounts for about 15% of Louisiana. Louisiana was asked to cut a certain amount, and it ended up where it was almost 50% of the amount was cut in New Orleans for the whole state. So 15% and then 50% cut. And also one of the questions which they didn't have answers for were the areas within New Orleans which were cut, which again suspiciously look like the poorer, blacker neighborhoods when you see the outage map. And the officials just could only talk about, they said they'd have to go and check how their computer models worked. So.
And this comes on the heels of some folks getting higher energy bills. And what can they expect now with these, with the outages, and what happened with the freeze? Are bills even going to go up?
Yep. Definitely. And when they talked about their results, talking to Wall Street analysts, they were talking about the $2 billion of outage expenses from last year's storms, the hurricanes, an additional $500 million of costs they estimate for the freeze outages, all of which they are allowed to pass through. The CEO said that they would do what they can to mitigate the way that it's passed through to customers.
Okay. All right, Tony. Thanks a lot. Okay, Errol, back over to you. Looks like we're going to have a Gulf Coast train from New Orleans to Mobile.
It's kind of refreshing that in this day and age we're still talking about passenger trains. So it's good to know somebody's doing that. There's been train service between New Orleans and Mobile before. During the World's Fair, they had something called the Gulf Wind, which ran back and forth. And there was a time when the Amtrak Sunset Limited, which runs from Los Angeles to New Orleans, they actually expanded to Miami so it could go through Mobile and the Gulf Coast. The problem is, imagine if you got a train going between Los Angeles and Miami, somewhere along the line, something's going to happen that makes it late by the time it gets to Mobile. And people have complained that these trains, that they really weren't very reliable. And but this is a train that would be about New Orleans to Mobile. There's this coalition that's been established that would be running it. They're the ones who are putting it together. Money is being raised from the states that are affected. That'd be New Orleans, Mississippi, and Alabama. Mississippi has 4 stops in this. It would stop in Biloxi and Gulfport and Pascagoula and Bay St. Louis, and it started in New Orleans and Mobile. And so it would really be a New Orleans train. I'm even told that locals would have so much authority over this, they could even select the beer that's going to be served in the train. But it would be 4 trains a day, that each morning and each afternoon the train would leave from each of the 2 cities and go back and forth. Service is supposed to begin in 2022. Amtrak feels confident enough that they were able to announce that the mayor's office put out an announcement saying we're going to do it. There has been opposition. The main opposition has been from the freight carriers, that those railroad tracks are operated by CSX, which is the former Southern Railways in Norfolk Southern. And the last thing a freight train wants is a passenger train on its line. But the law is in favor of the passenger train, saying you got to allow it if they want to. Also, the Port of Mobile has had questions about it because they're afraid of the freight lines being clogged from getting cargo to their ships. But through all that, it looks like it's happening probably in early 2022. And if it works, I mean, if it develops an audience, develops followers, this could be a good economic boom for all sides of this.
And so it's not going as far as Pensacola ever. It's just this is it. Mobile, New Orleans.
And if it did, Florida's going to have to put up some money because all of the states have put up, as Amtrak. And so it was quite a coalition to put together.
Okay, all right. Well, that's good to hear. All righty, thanks a lot. Sticking with you, other stories.
Kind of a fun thing. There's a website of all things about Louisiana movie posters. And there's been like a couple of thousand movies made. But type this in, it's a fun thing. There's a couple in New Orleans that just made a collection with funding from the Jazz Fest. You can go and just look at these movie posters. And it's it's a virtual thing. It's a virtual museum. And it's a fun thing to do.
Okay. Katie, over to you.
We are, of course, as Errol mentioned, kind of in the beginning of the show, starting to take a look at the 1-year anniversary of COVID. And so I'm working on some touching stories and just some stories in general about the impact that this has had on all of our lives. So I'm going to be working on 5 of those. And then David Hammer has an investigation on Monday looking into a sophisticated scam involving Entergy.
1 year. It's hard to believe, huh?
Yeah.
This has been a very strange year. Tyler, let's go over to you.
Yeah, sure. Again, so this congressional election, the primary election is on March 20th, but early voting is on March 6th. The folks want to go out early, and that goes through March 13th. 15 candidates in the field for the 2nd congressional district race.
Okie-doke. Thanks a lot. All righty, Tony, your turn.
Jazzland, the city said in December they really wanted to make sure they'd get a project going there this time. It looks like that even though they extended the deadline this month, they got the same folks as you've seen before. And Jazzland Park, which is, I think the company behind it is called Boomer, run by a former Disney guy, looks like the front runner. So they might try to revive Jazzland there, even though the city really didn't want an amusement park out there. They wanted Amazon. Somebody like that.
Okay, alrighty. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us, too. And, of course, we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.